Dax Holt sat alone in his dimly lit cabin, the hum of his old coffee maker the only sound in the silence of the early morning. The world outside was still. Peaceful. Something he hadn't known in years. The war, the bloodshed, the battles, they were all distant memories now, buried beneath layers of dirt and time. But sometimes, in the quietest of moments, the past came rushing back. Today, it had a face. A sudden pulse of energy ripped through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of a ship's thrusters descending. Dax's heart skipped a beat, and he reached for the old, worn rifle that rested on the wall. In an instant, his body was on alert, instincts kicking in as if he had never left the battlefield. He had thought the alien visits had died down, but apparently, he was wrong. And this time, it wasn't just another diplomatic envoy. He could feel it in the air, something was off. He stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the harsh sunlight as the craft touched down 100 meters from his cabin. The ship was sleek, almost graceful, unlike anything he had seen in his mercenary days. A shimmering metallic surface, far too advanced to belong to any faction he recognized. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a group of figures stepping out, young, confident, and, as Dax noted with a wry smile, completely unaware of what they had just walked into. One by one, the aliens filed out. There were 5 of them in total, all varying in size, shape, and color. The tallest was a striking figure, green skin, lean, and commanding in presence. She was the first to speak, her voice surprisingly smooth for someone who looked ready to lead an army. "I am Zara, leader of the second cohort of the Galactic Exploration Program," she announced, her eyes scanning Dax as if she had already decided that he was beneath her. "We've come to Earth to conduct field studies, particularly in human conflict resolution." Dax didn't lower the rifle but kept his aim steady, scanning the group. Zara seemed like the type who would lecture a planet into submission. But it was the other members who piqued his interest. Fax was massive, almost as large as 2 men stacked on top of each other. His alien features were an intimidating blend of jagged bone ridges and muscular limbs, making him seem more monster than ally. Yet his eyes betrayed an almost childlike excitement. Lyra, on the other hand, was all sharp angles and sleek limbs, the air around her crackling with energy from the devices she tinkered with on her wrist. Her eyes were sharp, and her movements fast, almost as though she were ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Cora was quieter, almost hidden in the shadows of the group. Her pale blue skin and slender frame gave her an ethereal look, but her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, spoke of empathy. There was a strength in her gaze, but it was buried beneath layers of caution. Then, there was the smallest of them, Tlar. Barely visible beneath the cluster of taller figures, Tlar was an odd sight, a creature covered in shifting patterns that seemed to blend with the environment. His lack of physical form didn't make him any less dangerous. If anything, it made him the most unpredictable. "We've come to observe," Zara continued, undeterred by Dax's unyielding posture. "To understand how humans resolve their conflicts. We have studied your history, your wars, your struggles. Now we will see how you fight firsthand." Dax exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle but not yet relaxing his stance. "You came here to study human conflict resolution," he muttered, "and you thought picking a fight with me was a good idea?" Zara's smile was cold, almost patronizing. "Not a fight. A test. We will simulate a scenario, and you will demonstrate how you handle it. There's no need for violence, of course. We are simply interested in your approach." Dax sized her up. This wasn't just a study. They were trying to see if humans could be controlled, bent to their will. He could feel it, the condescending tone, the undercurrent of superiority that radiated off them. They were used to having control, used to ruling with their technology and intellect. They probably thought that one human, one ex-mercenary, would be nothing. "Well, let's get one thing straight," Dax said, his voice firm, "I'm not your test subject. And if you think for 1 second I'll just play along with whatever little game you've got planned, you're about to find out how very wrong you are." Zara's eyes narrowed. "You may find this more difficult than you expect. We've mastered technology you can hardly comprehend. Technology, Dax scoffed, doesn't mean a damn thing when you're facing someone who's been through the worst of it. The silence stretched between them, tension crackling in the air. Fex growled low in his throat, eager for action, but Zara held up a hand, stopping him. Very well, human. We'll see how much of a threat you truly are. Her voice was sharp, final. Let the simulation begin. And just like that, Dax knew this would not be a simple encounter. They were about to learn just how deadly a former mercenary could be when faced with a challenge. The cold wind whistled through the trees, carrying a sense of foreboding as Dax walked across the rocky clearing. The alien craft loomed behind him, its sleek metal exterior casting long shadows in the early morning light. He felt the weight of Zara's gaze on his back, sharp, calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. But Dax wasn't prey. He was the hunter. Let's get this over with, he muttered under his breath, his hand tightening around the rifle slung over his shoulder. It wasn't a weapon he planned to use yet, but the comfort of its presence was enough to steady his nerves. He had fought in wars, taken down the most dangerous enemies, and survived the impossible. These aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Zara, Fex, Lyra, Cora, and Tlar stood before him, waiting in a loose formation, their expressions unreadable. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken expectations. Zara's eyes glinted with arrogance, clearly anticipating an easy victory. You'll start by demonstrating your tactical capabilities, Zara declared, her voice cutting through the silence. We've set up a simulation. Consider it a training exercise. Nothing more. Dax narrowed his eyes. A simulation. They had no idea what they were in for. All right, he said, squaring his shoulders, his voice steady but laced with a hint of challenge. Let's see what you've got. Without another word, Zara raised a hand, and the ground beneath Dax's feet rumbled. The earth split open with a deafening crack, revealing a complex network of mechanical structures rising from the ground. They were traps, high-tech snares, force fields, and concealed weapons designed to test his every move. Dax's mind went into overdrive, analyzing the layout in seconds, picking apart the weaknesses in the design. He could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline, the rush that came with being on the edge, with being hunted. But now, it was his turn to hunt. I'll give you this much, he said, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. You've got imagination. But this is child's play. Fex growled from behind him, clearly agitated. The massive alien's fists clenched, but Zara gave him a sharp look, silencing him. Dax could feel the giant's frustration, the temptation to rush into action. But this wasn't about brute strength. It was about survival. The first trap activated, an energy field that shot up from the ground, slicing through the air with a hum. Dax's instincts kicked in before his brain had a chance to process the danger. He dropped to the ground, rolling sideways just as the barrier surged past where he had been standing. The heat from the field singed the edge of his jacket, but he was already moving, crawling toward the nearest piece of cover, a jagged rock outcropping. The aliens watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. Zara's face betrayed a hint of annoyance. She had expected him to fail immediately, to be overwhelmed by their technology. But Dax wasn't just a man, he was a machine built for war, honed by years of combat. He peeked around the rock, assessing his next move. Tlar was the first to act, his form rippling and blending with the environment as he moved with eerie precision. The camouflaged alien slid silently between shadows, weaving through the traps as though he were part of the landscape. It was a disturbing sight, something Dax had never encountered before. Lyra, meanwhile, was already at the edge of the field, her eyes locked onto the next trap, a force field that pulsed with energy. Her fingers flicked across her wrist, and a small device sprang to life, sending a wave of electromagnetic interference toward the field. It flickered, destabilizing briefly before going dark. Clever. You've got some tricks, Dax muttered to himself, impressed despite his annoyance. He moved out from behind the rock, his mind calculating the next steps. The real challenge wasn't the traps themselves, but the aliens who had designed them. Zara and her team were watching, evaluating his every move. They weren't just testing his skills, they were testing his limits. Cora stepped forward, her movements calm and deliberate. She raised her hand, and a gust of wind whipped across the clearing, carrying the scent of ozone. It was a subtle, almost graceful manipulation of the atmosphere. The ground beneath Dax shifted, the air thickening with static as she attempted to force him off balance. But Dax had trained his entire life to fight against the unpredictable. He staggered for a moment but steadied himself, using his training to counter her subtle attack. "You're not going to break me," Dax said, his voice steady, though there was a trace of something deeper in his tone, something akin to respect. Zara's lips curled into a slight smile, clearly pleased with the way the simulation was unfolding. But Dax wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. His next move was quick, too quick for them to follow. He sprinted toward the central control unit of the trap system, knowing it would be the key to ending this. He had to take down their technology, disable their control. His body moved fluidly, his military training coming to the forefront as he avoided the traps, dodging the beams of energy and the electrical pulses that tried to stop him. Just as he reached the control panel, Fex roared in anger and charged. The ground shook beneath the alien's massive footsteps. Dax's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He dove for the console, slamming his fist into the panel. Sparks flew as the system shut down. The traps began to power down, one by one. "Game over," Dax muttered, panting slightly. He turned toward the aliens, his eyes locking with Zara's. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Zara's smile widened, no longer condescending but admiring. "Impressive," she said. "You may have more to offer than we anticipated." Dax straightened, his stance unwavering. "I'm not here for your game. But if you want to see what humanity is really capable of, then buckle up. It's about to get interesting." And with that, the true test had begun. The walls of the alien fortress loomed like ancient giants, their smooth, metallic surfaces gleaming under the artificial light. Dax stood before them, his breath steady, eyes fixed on the entrance. Behind him, Zara's team moved silently, their faces grim. This wasn't just another test. No. This was the trial that would decide everything. Last chance to back out, Zara's voice broke the silence, sharp and confident, as she stepped closer, her footsteps betraying none of the tension that hung in the air. "We don't need you to win. We just need you to prove that humanity has what it takes to survive in our universe." Dax shot her a side glance. "I'm not here for survival. I'm here to show you how humanity does things. The way you're expecting us to fold? Not gonna happen." Zara's lips quirked into a smirk, but there was no amusement in her gaze. "We'll see about that." The group entered the fortress, the door sliding open with a hiss. Inside, the air smelled sterile, too clean, as if it had never known the touch of human sweat or the dust of battle. The room was vast, stretching beyond the reach of Dax's vision. He could feel the weight of the building pressing down on him, the walls designed to hold power, intimidation woven into their very structure. A low hum filled the air, and the floor beneath Dax's boots suddenly shifted, revealing a large circular arena, lit by harsh white lights that seemed to drain color from everything they touched. The arena stretched out in front of him, and at the far end, towering over them all, was a massive holographic projection of a creature, a beast unlike anything Dax had ever seen. Its scales shimmered with the dark hue of the void, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. Its size was monstrous, its presence suffocating. Zara moved to the control panel at the edge of the arena. "You're going to face this creature. Your success will depend on how well you adapt to its tactics." Dax's gaze never left the hologram. "I've faced worse." "We'll see," Zara replied, her tone neutral. "The creature is programmed to test your weaknesses, your stamina, your adaptability, your intelligence. If you survive, we'll know you're ready for the final trial. If not..." Dax's heart rate stayed steady. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to win. His mind flashed back to countless battles, wars fought not for glory, but for survival, for the defense of everything he cared about. This alien trial was just another mission to complete. He didn't fear it. The arena's gates slammed shut with an ear-splitting clang. The creature's holographic form flickered and solidified, its massive claws clicking against the ground like thunder. It lunged forward with terrifying speed, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Dax's instincts kicked in. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's attack. The ground beneath him cracked open with the force of its strike, sending debris flying into the air. He rolled, positioning himself against the wall, his mind working at lightning speed to formulate a plan. Zara's voice crackled over the intercom, her tone cold and dispassionate. "Your move, human." "Don't worry," Dax muttered, more to himself than to her. "I've got this." The creature lunged again, but this time, Dax was ready. He rolled forward, using the momentum to grab a piece of the broken wall and hurl it toward the beast. It struck the creature in the face, causing it to stagger back momentarily. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give Dax a brief moment to think. The creature howled, shaking off the debris, its eyes locking onto him with a hunger that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just a test of strength. It was a test of will. Dax could feel the creature's intelligence, its primal instincts telling it exactly where he was, where he would be. This wasn't just a fight, it was a chess match, and the creature was playing for keeps. Suddenly, the creature's tail whipped around, smashing into the wall where Dax had just been standing. He barely avoided the attack, his heart racing. He couldn't keep dodging forever. He needed to outsmart this thing, to find its weakness. A low growl rumbled from the creature's throat as it advanced again, but Dax was already 2 steps ahead. He ducked into the shadows, waiting for the right moment. The creature paced back and forth, its attention flicking between every corner of the arena. It was methodical, precise, but Dax had fought against men just as ruthless. He knew how to wait for the perfect opening. And then it came. The creature lunged again, its massive jaws snapping shut mere inches from Dax's face. But this time, he was ready. He sprang from the shadows, using the momentum of the creature's attack against it. With a sharp twist, Dax grabbed the creature's throat, forcing it to the ground. For a moment, the beast thrashed beneath him, its body writhing in fury. But Dax's grip didn't falter. He had been trained for moments like this, for battles where strategy and strength went hand in hand. He held firm, feeling the creature's resistance weaken. Finally, the hologram flickered, the creature's form dissolving into the air as the lights dimmed. Zara's voice came through the intercom, this time tinged with something else, acknowledgement, perhaps. Impressive. But this was only the beginning. Dax rose to his feet, breathing heavily but standing tall. "Let's move on, then." Zara's expression remained unreadable, but there was something in her eyes now, a flicker of respect. This wasn't just a test of his body, it was a test of his spirit. And Dax had passed it. As the arena doors opened, the next trial awaited, and Dax felt the thrill of the hunt surge through him once more. This wasn't just about survival. This was about proving humanity's place in the galaxy. And he was just getting started. The air in the command chamber felt thick with anticipation. Dax stood at the center, surrounded by Zara and her alien team, all eyes on him. His chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, the weight of the upcoming trial pressing against his ribs. But this time, it wasn't just the creature he had to defeat, it was something far more complex. The stakes had escalated, and so had the challenge. He could sense it. "You've done well, human," Zara said, her voice soft but edged with an underlying tone of calculation. "But this next trial will test everything you've learned. The rules are simple, you must decide who to save. Choose wisely, for the outcome will determine your fate." Dax narrowed his eyes, his instincts prickling. Something about this felt wrong. "What are you talking about? What kind of test is this?" Without warning, the chamber's lights dimmed, and a heavy silence fell. A holographic projection materialized before him, 2 figures, each suspended in midair, both struggling. The first was a young woman, her features pale but resolute, The second was an elderly man, his frail body trembling as he reached out toward the woman. A voice echoed in the chamber, the tone neutral yet ominous. "You may save only one. The other will be lost." Dax's heart skipped a beat. His pulse surged, the sound of his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The young woman's face was unmistakable. It was his sister, Layla, her expression one of sheer terror as she reached out, as though she knew he was there but couldn't reach him. The elderly man, on the other hand, resembled a father figure, a man who had guided Dax during the most difficult years of his life. In an instant, Dax recognized the cruel nature of the test. It wasn't just about saving someone. It was about choice, sacrifice, and the weight of each decision. "Why?" Dax's voice was low, laced with disbelief. "Why do this to me?" Zara stepped forward, her gaze unflinching. "The galaxy has no room for weakness. Only those who can make the hard choices survive. This test will reveal whether you have the fortitude to lead your people. Can you make the decision that will ensure the survival of humanity?" The words hit Dax like a physical blow. His mind raced. He had trained for battle, for survival, for moments like the one he had faced in the arena. But this was different. This was a test of his very soul, his core beliefs. "I don't care about your games," Dax said, his voice hardening. "I'll save both of them." The holograms flickered, the figures of Layla and the elderly man fading in and out of focus. Their desperate cries filled the room, their eyes wide with fear. Dax's heart clenched in his chest. He couldn't choose between them. It wasn't about weakness or strength, it was about love, about sacrifice. Zara's eyes narrowed. "This is not a choice you can ignore. Make a decision, human. You do not have time." The pressure mounted. The choice, as cruel as it was his to make. His training, his years as a mercenary, had never prepared him for this kind of test. In battle, there was always a clear enemy, a clear goal. But this was a moral battleground, one where every move had consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Dax's mind flashed back to the battles he had fought, the comrades he had lost, the lives he had taken. All those moments had been shaped by the choices he made. But none of those choices had ever felt like this. None had weighed so heavily on his soul. "I can't choose," Dax said, his voice trembling for the first time. He stepped back, hands clenched into fists. "You can't make me choose. I won't do it." Zara's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something resembling respect. "It is not for you to decide whether you can or cannot. You will choose." Dax's mind raced. He had been trained to adapt, to act under pressure, but this was a different kind of fight, one that demanded more than physical strength or strategy. It demanded sacrifice, and the cost of that sacrifice was more than he could bear. Suddenly, his mind cleared. There was only one option, one that he couldn't deny, no matter how painful it was. With a heavy heart, Dax reached forward, his fingers trembling as he touched the hologram of the elderly man. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I have to save him." The chamber fell into an eerie silence. The figure of the elderly man solidified, his body fading from the projection and into the real world. He gasped as he was released from his suspended state, his hands reaching out in confusion, before Dax caught him, steadying him with a firm grip. Layla's figure, however, vanished completely, leaving only the echo of her cries in Dax's mind. His chest tightened as the weight of his decision crashed down upon him. He had made the choice. He had chosen the life of the elder, but the cost was something that could never be undone. Zara's voice cut through the silence. "You have chosen. But remember, Dax, this decision will follow you." Dax's hands shook as he helped the elderly man to his feet. His heart was still heavy with the weight of what he had done, but he knew one thing for certain, there was no turning back now. This was just the beginning. And whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on. The next trial awaited. But for now, all he could do was carry the consequences of his choice.